Welcome to the Page One Podcast, a twice-weekly podcast featuring a variety of guests and thought leaders on topics ranging from channel strategies to tariffs, influencer marketing, best-in-class product launches, and all the details about how to accelerate your e-commerce sales with the big box retailers, or what we call R-commerce. Now here's your host, Luke Peters.
Thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast. I am your host, Luke Peters, and this is the podcast where I bring you the best and brightest leaders to share consumer product sales and marketing strategies that will help you grow your business. I'm the CEO and founder of Newer Appliances, where I cut my teeth selling products online, and now I've started Retail Band, where I hope to help other brands succeed in product launches, influencer marketing, and B2B online sales strategy. And right now I'm offering a free evaluation of your online sales strategy. If you're interested, find me on LinkedIn or email me at luke@retailband.com. We can see if influencers are the right fit for your product, and also take a look at your online sales strategy and also the accounts you're selling into. How are you doing on homedepot.com and wayfair.com and Amazon? And hopefully we can provide a lot of value. So look forward to connecting with you all there. In this episode, you're going to learn from Adam Kraft, founder of Elevated Craft, and his flagship product, the Elevated Craft Cocktail Shaker. This design raised over $472,000 on Kickstarter late last year. He continued taking pre-sales, and in just a few months, his revenues exceeded $600K from almost 8,000 backers. So this episode is going to be focused on crowdfunding. I think it's the first time on the Page One podcast that we've talked about this subject, and I think there's a ton of value here, especially because it's a different channel. That's why I'm interested in it. You know, and Amazon obviously is a massive channel, and there's a lot going on there, but this is a completely different channel and a chance for all of you brands to connect directly with a backer, you know, who is a customer, and definitely interested in learning more from you, Adam. Thanks for joining me on the Page One podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. And then a quick bio for Adam. Graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design and then got a second degree in management from Arizona State University. Spent about 5 years in the corporate world, then decided to start a boutique design and engineering firm. And over the last 6 years, they have worked on anything from consumer electronics, medical devices, housewares, and toys. So taking it from there, Adam, why don't you just briefly touch on size of the company, maybe total number of employees? Do you guys warehouse yourself or do you 3PL? And just any other details that'll give the listener a little bit more of an idea of your business.
Yeah, definitely. So you touched on that I have the design engineering consultancy. So that's a separate company. It's boutique. There's 3 of us in that, but we take on all kinds of crazy projects on that end. And then Elevated Craft is my own brand. And that's really me and a couple contractors. And it's an interesting time to be talking because it's really just getting off the ground with the latest crowdfunding project that we did. And yeah, that's kind of where it started.
And how many times have you done actually a crowdfunding project? And I guess what I'm getting at is this one was so successful. You know, you're selling a craft cocktail shaker. I think the price was around $40, right? $40 or $50?
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's a lot of backers, right? To get to almost 500,000 in sales. Is this something that you had done a few times previously to build up this skill and a following, or, you know, how did you kind of get to this point?
I guess the best way to describe that is I've been a student of crowdfunding since it started, or let's just say a fan. So Kickstarter came on board around 2009. And so I've tracked a lot of projects, but I've never actually launched myself. I've watched a few of our customers in the consultancy do their own projects, but nothing to any major scale. And it was really just approaching it like a design problem. So looking at it and doing all the research needed and learning as much as I could before launching it. And then, you know, really understanding if the product design that I came up with was crowdfundable, because not everything is. So it was kind of more about being a student of crowdfunding than really having a bunch of experience doing multiple projects or anything like that.
Well, so that's a really great success then. So you're basically saying, you know, you kind of hit a home run on this first one. And what I wanted to get into is, okay, you have this success on crowdfunding, you raise all this money, and then how does it work? Do you then produce the product afterwards so you don't have to have inventory going into it? And then once that happens, you fulfill these orders, but then do you take that success and then start selling it on Amazon and other channels? Or talk to me about where it goes from this point on.
Yeah, so the requirement on Kickstarter is that you have a working prototype and prior to going into it. And then I think based on kind of the way the Kickstarter community works, if you're doing a physical product, then they really want to see that you have taken it to that 90% stage where they know that they're going to actually get the product. And I should say, I think crowdfunding's evolved a lot in the past 10 years. And I think the days of somebody doing a potato salad Kickstarter campaign that raises $80,000 and that sort of thing, I think those are long gone. It's really a business at this point. And so in my case, I had already invested my own money in the molds and tooling that went into making the shaker and done about 4 rounds of samples. And so I was really confident that I could take it over the finish line. And what I didn't want to do though is place a big inventory run and not and have a bunch of inventory sitting around, or try to get it right on Amazon and hope it's going to sell. So that's where the crowdfunding came into play for me. I think that's pretty much the way it goes nowadays. If you're doing like a consumer electronic or something, you really want to have it almost done, and you're going to invest quite a bit on the front end before you get to launch. I think did that answer the question? Yeah, no, that's perfect. And then now you have these sales, so now it sounds like okay, then you run your production. Mm-hmm. But then what do you do? Now, does it become a product that then is just sold elsewhere on the internet? I mean, I'm assuming you don't have round 2 and round 3 for the same product. It's already created. So now you're off and selling it maybe on Amazon or somewhere else. Yeah. So in my case, this is actually really fresh after the Kickstarter campaign, and with Chinese New Year and everything in there, the product is not actually being manufactured just yet. So I'm doing a couple more rounds of samples. And the cool thing about Kickstarter is that what people and crowdfunding in general, I think what the backers are doing is they're investing in the experience and the story. So they want the product. Obviously, that's where they're putting their money, but they're willing to wait 6 months to get it. And the reason is because it's they get backer updates, they get communication with the creators, and it really gives them a channel to watch something grow. And so it's less about trying to expedite it to market. And I actually have talked to some major marketing companies that are behind some of these campaigns, and they say there's not seasonality on Kickstarter. So getting it and launching right at Christmas or something like that is the Kickstarter backer community are really their own subset of consumers. So where I go next is I'm actually still taking pre-orders through Indiegogo in demand. And that's a normal process, is that you essentially launch on Kickstarter because they have the bigger base of users. But Indiegogo did this really brilliant thing where they have a thing called in demand. And if you have success on another crowdfunding platform, you can go and continue taking pre-orders on Indiegogo in demand until you're ready to ship your product. And so that's where I've basically been able to run a really aggressive campaign on Kickstarter and then continue taking pre-orders to the tune of, now I'm up to around 620,000 in pre-sales. And as soon as I get through a couple more rounds of samples, I'll place my production order, and that'll really inform how much I should order on that first run. And with the Indiegogo in demand, you kind of get a sense for what the sales volume might be through one channel, similar to like a Shopify or something like that. And so that helps project out some of the numbers and say, am I going to sell 1,000 a month or 5,000 a month? So as far as a channel strategy post Kickstarter or post crowdfunding, I'm not totally sure if I'll go straight to Amazon. I for sure want to do a Shopify site and launch the product on there and try to have some additional offerings for people. But when you do a crowdfunding campaign, the real thing is taking care of the backers and making sure they're all happy and worrying about the rest later. And so while I have a strategy, I don't have a exact thing where I say, okay, I'm going to send 5,000 units to Amazon and try to get on, Wayfair or any of that other stuff. Right now it's backer focused because there's 8,069 backers or something like that as of this morning that all need taken care of. Yeah. So it's a big responsibility. Wow. That's awesome. So let's back up because hopefully, for the audience and I think you're doing great so far because I really understand how this works. So for the audience,
we're all launching products.
Yep.
All of us brands are doing it. And especially with tariffs, because prices go up and we're like, oh man, now we got to relaunch a bunch of products. And, I talked to brands, everybody from consumer electronic brands or, kitchen electrics or non-electrical products, could be tabletop stuff and all the way through, top of bed.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different categories and all of them are doing product launches, but they're 99% aren't thinking in these terms. So I kind of want to, now let's back up. So you had a product idea,
right?
And you designed the idea, and I know there's thought and planning in that. So we'll forget about that time involved because it could go back, many years or just a month.
Mm-hmm.
But from that point, you decide to do a crowdfunding, and like you said, you started on Kickstarter. How long ago was that? Just to give us a time period for how long could the typical campaign take and time investment involved?
Yeah. So the campaign runs a Kickstarter. You can do, I think, 30 to 60 days. I ran a 30-day campaign starting at the end of October and running through November. And so, but the preparation in that takes, you can spend a year on it. You're building out really high-end marketing assets, and there's a lot of planning behind it. And it's going to be different for every campaign because this was one that I did myself. So I hired people where I could and where I needed to. For example, filming the Kickstarter video that I had. So I found an editor that was also able to be the director for the day, and then we hired a camera guy and an audio guy. And we filmed the video in one day, but I probably spent 3 months writing the script. Doing tons and coming up with the shot list and everything else. And that's, bootstrapping it. That's also, it took me a lot longer because I think at the point that I came up with Elevated Craft and had a product design and started working with the factory, my wife and I also had twin babies. And so,
wow,
so
that's a life changer.
That added that added another layer. So they're actually a year old right now. So I've been working on this for over 18 months. I don't know how much quicker it would have happened if I didn't have the babies in that time. But it takes a long time for sure. I think the real thing is on your question of product launches is how do you choose between doing like an Amazon launch or launching at a trade show versus doing a crowdfunding campaign? And that's, I think there's, like you said, everybody's launching products, but how to think about that.
And we'll get into that. Actually, maybe that'll be next. But before I get there,
sure.
This is really interesting. So you're coming up with these assets and videos. And look, if, all of us launching on Amazon, we got to do the same thing. And,
mm-hmm.
and we should do the same, like give really high quality assets. And, we should all aspire to be there. But so that part's similar, but you're working within a Kickstarter framework. How do you actually get backers and eyeballs? Are you having to pay to play? How are you getting attention of the folks in Kickstarter? Because it is quick, like you said, 30 days in your case, a lot of work ahead of it. And the reason I ask that is obviously, so we can understand how that works, but also just because a lot of other channels now are all pay to play and they're closed. Facebook, if you're a business and you post, nobody actually sees your post. You got to pay, so on and so forth. Same with Instagram and all the social channels. And then even with Amazon now, a lot of companies, 50% of their sales are going to be paid. So curious how that works with Kickstarter.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Kickstarter really drives almost zero traffic to your campaigns. I think similar to Amazon or anything else, if you put it up, nobody's going to see it. There's a lot of some campaigns might get lucky and get picked up by a news outlet or something like that. But even those aren't as high value because back to the point that the backer community is really its own niche. So a normal consumer is not going to go on a Kickstarter campaign and back something and wait 6 months for it. And so sort of the pay to play is doing Facebook ads, doing Google ads and those things, but really focusing those around identifying people that have previously backed a campaign, have liked a Kickstarter page and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of marketing companies that have popped up around that because they build Facebook audiences and can identify those backers. And that's really what most people do. I think at this point, what the normal process is about 10 days before you launch the campaign, you do a lead gen where you basically do Facebook ads, have people go to a landing page, and if they want to, they put their email address in. And what that does is on day one, you want to get as many backers as possible. So the most important part of the campaign is really your first 3 days. So if you launch a campaign and then you start thinking about, oh man, I need to run some ads, the campaign's probably already a dud. So it's really a lot of preparation for those first 3 days, because that gives you the momentum so that whenever people land on the page, they go, oh man, they already hit their goal. Or, oh look, 1,200 people have already backed this in the first 3 days. So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. And then mostly, I think most campaigns are hiring specialized marketing companies that will typically do a commission base off of what you earn on the back end. So I interviewed a lot of different marketing companies after I had the assets built, because I wanted to show them what they might be marketing for me and make sure it was a good fit. And some of them wanted a lot of upfront fees, but the ones that were the real pros in the space that knew that they could generate a lot of money through the ads, they would do a commission based on the ads you run. And then you really, on the pay-to-play subject, you're financing the ads. So that's really, as somebody considering running a crowdfunding campaign, it's not like you can put it up there and hope that it's going to get traffic. You really have to look at it and say, okay, if I think this can generate, $200,000 or $1 million, I need to be prepared to spend 15 to 20% of that revenue on Facebook ads. So, pay to play for sure. You're buying ads.
For sure. Yeah. So you build that into your margins. Like people have to do on Amazon. So speaking of Amazon, let's get into that. So what are the advantages of using crowdfunding over Amazon and vice versa, if you have experience there?
Right. Yeah. So I think I'll give a story about the shaker. So whenever I first started thinking of the cocktail shaker, it kind of stemmed from, I came up with the name Elevated Craft as a brand, was able to trademark it. And that was sort of, I thought, could be a pretty cool umbrella brand where I could maybe design some coffee stuff or just anything craft related. Prior to doing that, I had actually designed a few vacuum insulated water bottles for somebody that was an Amazon seller. And I kind of learned the engineering and all that stuff of the stainless steel products and made connections with factories and all that. So I wanted to go ultra niche because I thought if I launched on Amazon, I could probably own that space and pay for the ads and everything and really kind of focus in for my first product. And that's where the cocktail shaker came into play. And it wasn't until I designed the shaker and found kind of the cool factor that made it where I thought in my head, okay, I can actually do a crowdfunding campaign. Because if I just launched a cocktail shaker, there's actually been a couple that have launched on Kickstarter, and I looked at those and they raised like $30,000 or something. And I knew that the effort going into doing a Kickstarter meant that I needed it to raise a lot, at least six figures, at least $100,000 for it to be worth launching on there. And so the decision between Amazon or Kickstarter was really the product drove that. And so if I just had a really nice looking shaker that didn't have any kind of bells and whistles to it, it could do really, really well on Amazon with good, all the good tips and tricks that everybody does on Amazon, and it would fall flat on Kickstarter. So I think that's really there are certain products that are Kickstarterable in my brain. And it really comes down to that kind of cool factor and understanding the crowdfunding community and what they might get excited about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm wondering, what we don't know, but what if this could have launched on Amazon and done over $1 million and you're like, wow, I could have had more sales going that direction because Amazon is so massive. And I guess, so the question I'm getting at here is, what is there an advantage though to having these backers and launching on Kickstarter? Can you now take that? And I know we talked about it earlier where you're still taking care of your backers, then you'll figure out next steps. But I know larger brands will launch on Kickstarter. And so I'm wondering from like a PR standpoint, is there a non-monetary benefit to having your product have a successful launch? So if a brand is launching a product and it's supposed to, it's coming in on say, July 1, or no, let's just say it's coming in for Christmas, right? And right now it's coming in for Christmas 2020. Is there an advantage to launch on Kickstarter ahead of that because they're going to get some sort of press that then they could use down the road, out somewhere in the marketplace?
Yeah, I really wish that Kickstarter still had the clout to get press in the way it used to. And to give you an idea, on my campaign, I had 0 major publications pick up the story and had a couple small blogs. So I really, of the amount that I raised, none of that had to do with any kind of PR. The reason being is that when talking to other backers and other bigger brands that have ran $1 million campaigns or a couple $1 million campaigns, they say that while sometimes the press will pick it up, it's often looked at as a risky subject, or even the bigger ones like a New York Times. I think they just won't write about it because it falls under kind of like the investment advice or something like that. And so the bigger brands, here's what I'll say on that is I don't think the press is really the answer. It's really the lifetime value of the backers. And so if I would have done an Amazon launch that was even more successful, I wouldn't have any backer communication or any email addresses or anything like that. And so what I do know about Kickstarter backers is that they tend to come back. If you do a good job and get them the product, they become the true fan, and that they become the people that I can go to as well and say, hey, I'm thinking about designing these two products. What do you guys think? And I don't think you can get that on Amazon and maybe not anywhere else.
That's a great answer, actually. So it's that customer feedback, that customer connection, and then your loyal tribe of fans that you can get in. And you have to do a good job to get those. Like you said, you have over 8,000 of them now. But yeah, so other than that, I mean, it is dollars and cents in the sense that there isn't as much, because I wasn't so sure about it. That's why I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I just don't know about it. And maybe some of the audience doesn't either. So there's so much for us to learn here. If you could do it again, what is something you might do differently? Maybe is there, something you've learned after going through this process?
Good question. Well, I think I had plans that didn't quite work out, and maybe I would hope that those would. So as an example, I had hoped to have somewhere around 100 cocktail shaker samples that I could then send out to like YouTube influencers and just try to get in the hands of people to help do some of the marketing. And that didn't come through. So I ended up using one factory to make the initial molds and stuff and give me the first round of samples, and kind of lost faith with them and ended up going with another factory for my production quality. So I had to pull the trigger with having, let's say, half a dozen samples that really, they proved out the design, but I wasn't able to do the type of marketing blitz that I would have. And I think that in the end, the campaign could have potentially been bigger, or it could have been the same size, but maybe more profitable. Because if I had somebody that has, 100,000 or 1 million YouTube followers or whatever, and they were able to make an unboxing video, that would be really awesome. So I think, if I could do it again, maybe just having the supply chain hammered out a little bit better, getting some more samples that I could send out, and that would be, potentially helpful. But it's all a gamble. You don't know if you send somebody the product, if they're going to do it in time or not. But I have seen that work for other campaigns where they send out product, and even to the point where they'll have the influencer like sign an NDA, and everybody puts the video out on the same day, and they'll pay those influencers and everything. But those have been some really, really big campaigns. Yeah,
that's a great insight. And it's funny because that's exactly what we do at Retail Band is we work with YouTube influencers like that. And I can tell you it's amazing. I mean, from an SEO perspective as well, and from a branding perspective, but also just because YouTube is just one of the few channels that's not kind of behind a paywall as much as, all the other social, like the Instagrams and everything else where, your audience just isn't seeing this stuff anymore unless you're paying. And I guess, I know, so the question, what I really wanted to kind of finish up the conversation on crowdsourcing is maybe your 3 biggest takeaways on how to get backer attention. And I guess it started with, building a list and Facebook ads. Anything else that you can add to that? So if someone's doing this and they've never done it before, and okay, now they know they have to prep and they've got to create beautiful assets ahead of time, and they got to plan ahead of time, and they got to create the lead gen and the Facebook advertising all planned ahead of time. What would you say are the 3 most important things to, get that effective result?
Yeah. So I guess the key takeaways that I had from it is if you think your product has the cool factor that the Kickstarter community is really hungry for, then the steps that I took, and I would do exactly the same way, is find 3 to 5 recent campaigns that are relevant to your product and that are, similar technology, similar audience, and make sure the campaigns are recent, like no more than 2 to 3 years old, because like I mentioned earlier, the crowdfunding platforms and communities have really evolved over the past few years. But those become the campaigns that you analyze like crazy and figure out, how big are their teams, how many Kickstarter campaigns have they done, and add them on LinkedIn and all that sort of stuff, because that's going to inform how successful your campaign can be. And I say that meaning, like, I'm all about looking at data and taking conservative guesses on things, but there's ways that you can look at these campaigns as well. There's actually a website called KickTracks, KICKTRAQ.com. And I don't know if you've seen this, but you can actually put in a Kickstarter campaign. It'll show you how many backers they had every single day of the campaign, how much they raised, and all of that sort of stuff. And that's super helpful. So what that's really giving you is a realistic picture, because the last thing I would tell somebody to do is, spend a bunch of money and time and everything and, have a campaign that you look at and you think is going to raise $1 million, but all the previous campaigns show that it's probably more like a $50,000 campaign, just for whatever reason, just because I think that the Kickstarter backers are kind of a specific crowd. So that's just kind of validating how to plan for the size of the campaign, and how much money, to spend on it, and then kind of go from there. There's so many tips and tricks that I have for this type of thing.
Yeah, no, but I think the key point, I guess really the key point that's coming through is you got to have a cool product. And as much as all of us brand owners love our products, we know which ones would fall into that category and wouldn't. So that's, I guess, the first, speed bump to go over is make sure you got the cool product. Yeah. And then, like you said, study, break these things down and be a student of the recent campaigns that did well and understand their teams and how they did it. So that, along with the traffic up front, like you spoke about, Kickstarter's not driving traffic to your campaign. You're going to have to use Facebook ads and some other source like that, where you can really segment down to that audience. So I think pulling all those together, that definitely, I know a lot more now than I did 30 minutes ago. So that, it gives me good insights. What is, something on your end, maybe it could be in this business or another, but maybe what's been your biggest mistake? And I asked that, maybe your biggest mistake or biggest regret. And it's always interesting to hear, because it's maybe something that you learned from or that the listeners can learn from, and tell us how that impacted you.
I think as it relates to this product is I spent a lot of time with that first factory and really just building that relationship with them. And I connected with the owner. He's about my age, and he had started the factory, let's say 10 years ago or whatever. And they're making stainless steel products, so it falls in the right category and everything. And, in my consulting side of the business, I go to China a couple times a year. And so I had actually gone to the factory, visited with him, spent time with his wife, his sister, I'd seen him in trade shows and everything. And ultimately, I let the relationship maybe put blinders on the fact that they weren't really set up to do a complicated product like mine. And it might not seem that complicated, but really a factory like theirs, they could do, vacuum insulated tumblers all day long. But the way that my design is, it really stretched their resources. And ultimately, it was a mutual breakup, but in the way that a lot of factories do business, it came towards the end, and they just couldn't get the samples as good as they needed. And then they tripled or quadrupled the price or something, which was effectively saying like, hey, we're not going to do this. So I just wasted a lot of time. I know that relationship building is important, but I could have been building relationships with 4 different factories at the same time than focusing all my attention on one. And I think that was just maybe an amateur move that I made and won't do again. And at this point, with the future products, it wasn't that I didn't get multiple quotes. It's that I found somebody that I liked and I really put a lot of time into them and let their excuses kind of go on too long, and I cut them off.
Have a diversified supply chain. I think that's the learning from that one. But listen, yep. Hey, relationships matter, and we can all kind of get tricked into that. It's tough, especially when you're meeting people face to face and they're telling you they can get it done. You have to take them, for their word, and especially when you're talking directly to them and it's not over the phone. So, but that is still a great story, and I think valuable reminder for all of us. I think we're all doing that, and then we all want to push certain factories or make our business larger with them, because then we're more important, we get better pricing. But then we also have to remember that, hey, we want to be diversified and have a couple of other factories. So it's a tough balancing act, but definitely a good lesson that it looks like you learned there. I'm sure it will help you in your next product launches.
Yeah.
Cool. And I guess, just before we wrap up, something that's always interesting to me and with successful entrepreneurs like yourself is what is something like maybe it's a habit or a ritual or a practice that you've learned or done that's made you a better person at work or at home?
I guess maybe at work it would be as it relates to the elevated craft and this helps my customers as well on the consulting side, but essentially keeping big lists of product ideas, because you never know, when you're going to look at that list and the time might be right. And so if I have let's say a consumer electronic idea for something, I'll write it down and throw in a couple descriptions, but it now wouldn't be a good time for me to launch that from a risk factor. But that's been a super helpful thing, and I don't know. I think just kind of taking time on it as well and being super analytical. My background's not in finance or anything, but I do what I just call brute force logic. And so I'll take spreadsheets and build them out and analyze the numbers and see if it makes sense to spend money on advertising, all that sort of stuff. And so maybe the takeaway on that is just not being afraid to dive into something that it's not my expertise, but like there's, everybody can do it if you kind of have, a set of logic that you're going off of and you can analyze stuff. And so that's always been helpful to not be afraid to dive into things that haven't had, training in the background on.
Yeah. Well, you got to measure everything. So that's smart, and you're launching this campaign and expenses can get out of whack. So you have to know where everything's going. So definitely, important for any successful entrepreneur. So listen, thanks, Adam. It's been really interesting learning about crowdfunding. Hopefully the audience can follow the journey, from start to finish and kind of understand the differences. And, I know you also do product design and you have that, your second company is focused on that. And so just wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there a way listeners can find you? Do they find you on LinkedIn, or is there another better place for them to contact you?
I think LinkedIn is good. Also direct contact. If they go to elevatedcraft.com, that will forward over to whatever campaign is active at the time or the website. And that's something that, I plan on continuing to be heavily involved in. So at this point, if somebody messages on there, I'm getting it and I'm responding. So yeah, I think those are good places to go.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Page One podcast. And I'll also want to thank all the listeners for listening to this episode of the Page One podcast, sponsored by Retail Band. And quick reminder that I'm offering a free evaluation of your online sales strategy. Take a look at your digital strategy on Amazon, Home Depot, Wayfair, and other online retail channels. And we can take a look at your products and selling tools that you're using and kind of compare it to our analytics. And I'll present the findings directly to you. We can see if influencer marketing is a good play for you, especially how we do it on YouTube, which is really unique and gives you kind of an evergreen SEO feel to the brand and keywords that you're targeting. So if you're interested, find me on LinkedIn or email me at luke@retailband.com. And just want to thank everybody for listening. Really appreciate all of your comments and suggestions, and especially your reviews on iTunes. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Page One podcast with Luke Peters. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our other segments. Also, please help us out by leaving us a rating on iTunes. Want to learn more about our commerce? Check out www.retailband.com to get more great tips and tricks on how to accelerate your e-commerce sales with the big box retailers.